The informant was supposed to be untraceable. He was a mid-level IRGC officer stationed in Vienna, recruited by the FBI 3 years earlier through a patient cultivation operation. He provided invaluable intelligence on Iranian operations in Europe, agent identities, procurement networks, assassination planning. His FBI handlers took extraordinary precautions. His identity was compartmentalized at the highest level. Communications used encrypted channels that changed weekly. Meetings occurred in third countries with elaborate counter-surveillance protocols. On a Tuesday morning in March, his body was found in a Vienna apartment. He had been tortured before death. His fingers had been broken. His teeth had been extracted. Whatever secrets he possessed had been ripped from him before a bullet ended his suffering. The Austrian police ruled it a professional assassination. The FBI knew it was something worse. Someone inside the bureau had betrayed him. This wasn't the first informant to die under suspicious circumstances. Over the previous 18 months, 7 FBI sources with access to Iranian intelligence had been killed, arrested, or disappeared. Operations that should have succeeded had failed. Surveillance targets had vanished hours before raids. The Iranians seemed to know every FBI move before it happened. The impossible conclusion could no longer be avoided. There were moles inside the FBI. An internal investigation, codenamed Mirror Hunt, would eventually identify 5 FBI employees who had been recruited by Iranian intelligence. For 4 years, they had been systematically betraying American operations, burning sources, and sabotaging investigations. And they were 4 days away from exposing the identity of the FBI's most valuable asset inside Iran. An individual whose intelligence had prevented multiple terrorist attacks and provided crucial insight into Iran's nuclear program. This is how the FBI hunted traitors within its own ranks and saved the source whose exposure would have been the greatest counterintelligence disaster in bureau history. The investigation began with a pattern that shouldn't exist. FBI counterintelligence operations against Iran had been failing at a statistically impossible rate. Between January 2022 and September 2024, the Bureau had launched 23 significant operations targeting Iranian intelligence activities in the United States and abroad. 18 had failed. Surveillance targets had changed routines hours before coverage began. Recruitment approaches had been rejected by targets who seemed to know they were being assessed. Raid locations had been emptied before tactical teams arrived. Sources had been identified and neutralized. The failure rate was 78%. Random chance couldn't explain it. Operational security failures couldn't explain it. Even exceptional Iranian counterintelligence couldn't explain it. The only explanation was betrayal from within. FBI director authorized the most sensitive investigation in bureau history. Mirror Hunt would operate outside normal channels. Its existence would be known to fewer than a dozen people. Its investigators would report directly to the director, bypassing the entire chain of command. The assumption had to be that the moles could be anywhere, including in positions that would normally oversee counterintelligence investigations. Trust no one. The Mirror Hunt team was assembled from agents with unimpeachable records and no connection to Iran operations. They were told only that they were investigating a potential security breach. The full scope, multiple moles, years of betrayal, dead sources, was too sensitive to share even with them. They began with the failures. Every compromised operation, every dead source, every suspicious coincidence. The team mapped access, who knew what, and when they knew it. The pattern that emerged was damning. The first suspect was identified through process of elimination. Of the 18 failed operations, 14 shared a common element. They had been briefed to a weekly interagency coordination meeting that included representatives from FBI, CIA, NSA, and Defense Intelligence Agency. The meeting was designed to prevent duplication of effort and ensure coordinated approaches to Iranian targets. Attendees had access to operational summaries, source information, and planned activities. Someone in that meeting was reported to Tehran. Mirror hunt investigators narrowed the list. They examined each regular attendee, analyzing personal finances, travel patterns, communications, and behavioral indicators. One FBI representative stood out, a supervisory special agent in the Counterintelligence Division. 16 years with the Bureau. Solid performance reviews. No obvious red flags in his background, but subtle anomalies appeared under scrutiny. His personal finances showed patterns inconsistent with his salary. Nothing dramatic, but small deposits that didn't trace to obvious sources. His travel included side trips that didn't appear in official records. His phone showed gaps in location data during certain periods. Surveillance was authorized. The supervisor was meeting with an individual who shouldn't exist. FBI surveillance teams documented meetings at restaurants, parks, and shopping centers. The meetings were brief, rarely more than 20 minutes. They involved handoffs of envelopes and packages. The individual he met was identified through facial recognition. He was an Iranian intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover at Iran's UN mission in New York. He was a known IRGC operative, previously identified in connection with surveillance of Iranian dissidents in the United States. An FBI supervisor was meeting regularly with Iranian intelligence. The betrayal was confirmed, but mirror hunt investigators knew he couldn't be operating alone. The pattern of compromised operations was too broad. A single mole couldn't explain all the failures. There were more. The investigation expanded methodically. If one supervisor could be recruited, others could be as well. The mirror hunt team examined every FBI employee with significant access to Iran-related operations. The criteria were specific: access to the compromised operations, opportunity to communicate with external handlers, and any behavioral indicators that might suggest compromise. Over 3 months, 4 additional suspects emerged. A counterintelligence analyst who prepared briefing materials for senior leadership. Her work product was distributed to every compromised operation. She had access to source identities that should have been compartmentalized. A special agent in the New York field office who handled liaison with Allied intelligence services. He attended briefings on joint operations that had subsequently failed. His finances showed unexplained improvements. A technical specialist in the FBI's communications division who had access to encrypted channels used for source communications. She could have compromised the secure systems that protected source identities. A staff operations specialist who managed logistics for sensitive operations. He knew when and where operations would occur. Information that had clearly reached Iranian hands. 5 FBI employees. 4 years of betrayal. Dozens of compromised operations. At least 7 dead sources. The scope of the penetration was catastrophic. The most urgent concern was a source known only by a cryptonym. Cardinal was the FBI's most valuable human intelligence source inside Iran. Recruited 12 years earlier, Cardinal had provided intelligence that prevented multiple terrorist attacks, exposed Iranian assassination operations, and revealed critical details about Iran's nuclear program. Cardinal's identity was the most closely guarded secret in American counterintelligence. Only 8 people within the FBI were supposed to know Cardinal's true name. The source's intelligence was laundered through multiple channels before reaching analysts, specifically to protect against the possibility of penetration. But the protections had been breached. Mirror hunt investigators discovered that the compromised analyst had accessed files she shouldn't have been able to reach. Through a combination of social engineering and system vulnerabilities, she had obtained fragments of information that, combined, could identify Cardinal. She had been assembling the puzzle for months, and intercepted communications indicated she was preparing to transmit her findings. The transmission was scheduled for 4 days away. If Cardinal was exposed, Iranian security services would arrest, torture, and execute one of America's most important intelligence sources. 12 years of irreplaceable access would be destroyed. The intelligence that had protected American lives would end, and a human being who had risked everything to help America would die because of treachery within the FBI itself. Operation Looking Glass was authorized immediately. The operation faced unprecedented challenges. 5 FBI employees had to be arrested simultaneously. Any warning would allow them to alert their handlers, potentially triggering immediate action against Cardinal. The arrests had to be perfect, but arresting FBI agents was extraordinarily complex. They had training in surveillance detection. They had access to FBI systems that might reveal investigation activity. They had colleagues who might inadvertently warn them. The operation would be conducted by FBI personnel who had no idea they were arresting fellow agents until the moment of execution. Cover stories were prepared. Each target would be summoned to a meeting location under plausible pretexts. Tactical teams would be positioned at each location. The arrests would occur within a 60-second window. No room for error. The final 4 days were excruciating. Mirror hunt investigators monitored the 5 suspects around the clock. Any indication that they suspected investigation would require immediate action, potentially compromising the operation. The analyst continued her normal routine. She attended meetings. She prepared briefing materials. She accessed files that she carefully logged to avoid suspicion. She had no idea she was being watched. The supervisor continued meeting his Iranian handler. The meetings were documented but not interrupted. Premature action would alert the network. The other 3 suspects maintained their routines: work, home, weekend activities, normal lives concealing extraordinary betrayal. 72 hours before the scheduled transmission, Mirror Hunt was ready. The arrests launched at 6 a.m. on a Thursday. Each suspect received a summons to a meeting that seemed routine: a briefing, a personnel matter, an operational consultation, nothing that would trigger suspicion. At 5 locations across Washington, New York, and Quantico, tactical teams waited. The supervisor arrived at FBI headquarters for what he believed was a budget meeting. As he stepped off the elevator, he was surrounded by agents he didn't recognize. His credentials were seized. His phone was taken. He was informed he was under arrest for espionage. He said nothing. At the New York field office, the liaison agent was arrested in a conference room. He'd been told he was receiving a commendation. Instead, he received handcuffs. At Quantico, the technical specialist was detained at her workstation. FBI cyber team simultaneously locked her access to all systems, preventing any attempt to send warning communications. At an off-site location, the analyst was arrested as she arrived for a supposed source meeting. She had brought documents she intended to photograph, evidence that would be used against her at trial. The operations specialist was taken at his home, where tactical teams found $47,000 in cash hidden in his garage. By 6:15 a.m., all 5 suspects were in custody. None had been able to send warnings. The interrogations began immediately. Each suspect was held in isolation, unaware of whether colleagues had been arrested. The mirror hunt team used this uncertainty strategically. The supervisor broke first. After 6 hours, faced with surveillance evidence documenting his meetings with Iranian intelligence, he requested a cooperation agreement. He provided extensive information about his recruitment, his handler, his methods, and his knowledge of the broader network. His recruitment had occurred 5 years earlier during a vacation in Istanbul. He had been approached by a woman who claimed to be an academic interested in American counterterrorism policy. The relationship had evolved. He had shared information he shouldn't have shared. He had been photographed in compromising situations. When the blackmail began, he had convinced himself he was only providing low-level information. As the demands escalated, he was too compromised to extract himself. The payments had started at $5,000 monthly. By the end, he was receiving $25,000 per meeting. He provided information about the other 4 suspects, confirming that they had been recruited through similar methods by connected Iranian intelligence officers. The analyst was the most difficult interrogation. Unlike the others, she appeared to be a true believer. Her parents had emigrated from Iran before the revolution. She had been raised with grievances about American interference in Iranian affairs. Her recruitment hadn't required blackmail or money. She had volunteered. A contact in the Iranian-American community had identified her sympathies and connected her with an intelligence officer. She had been providing information for 6 years. Longer than any other member of the network. She had caused the most damage. The source identities she had compromised. The operations she had sabotaged. The Cardinal identification she had nearly completed. She showed no remorse. In her view, she had been serving a righteous cause against American imperialism. The sources who died because of her betrayal were traitors who deserved their fate. She refused to cooperate and demanded a lawyer. The intelligence extracted from cooperating suspects revealed the full architecture of Iranian penetration. The network had been built deliberately over years. Iranian intelligence had identified FBI personnel with access to Iran operations and assessed them for potential recruitment. The approaches varied based on target profiles. Those with financial vulnerabilities received money. Those with personal secrets received blackmail. Those with ideological sympathies received validation. The network was compartmentalized. Each member knew only their own handler and had limited awareness of other sources. This structure was designed to limit damage if any single member was compromised, but it had failed. The supervisor's meetings with his handler had been too frequent, too observable. The analyst's system access had left traces. The financial anomalies had accumulated. Iranian intelligence had built an impressive network, but they had underestimated American counterintelligence capabilities. Cardinal was extracted within hours of the arrests. The source had been operating inside Iran with extraordinary bravery for 12 years, providing intelligence that saved American lives, taking risks that could have resulted in torture and death at any moment. Through secure channels, Cardinal was warned that compromise was imminent. Extraction protocols that had been prepared for exactly this scenario were activated. Within 36 hours, Cardinal was out of Iran. The details of the extraction remained classified. The route, the methods, the allies who assisted, all protected to preserve capabilities for future operations. What can be said is that Cardinal survived. The most valuable source in American counterintelligence was not betrayed by the traitors within the FBI. The intelligence relationship that had protected American interests for over a decade was preserved. The extraction was the operation's greatest success. The prosecution of the 5 FBI employees was the most significant espionage case against Bureau personnel in American history. The charges were severe: conspiracy to commit espionage, transmission of classified information to a foreign government, and, for those whose betrayal had led to source deaths, conspiracy to commit murder. Several charges carried potential death penalties. The supervisor and 3 other defendants ultimately pleaded guilty in exchange for cooperation agreements and life sentences without parole. The analyst went to trial. She maintained her belief that her actions were justified. Her defense argued that she was a political prisoner persecuted for her beliefs. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. She received a death sentence, later commuted to life without parole after appeals. The damage assessment took years to complete. The 5 moles had compromised virtually every significant FBI operation against Iran during their period of activity. They had exposed dozens of sources, leading to at least 7 confirmed deaths and an unknown number of arrests and disappearances. They had provided Iranian intelligence with detailed understanding of FBI methods, capabilities, and limitations. This knowledge would inform Iranian operations for years. They had undermined Allied intelligence relationships. Foreign services that had shared information with the FBI now questioned whether their sources had been compromised. The full cost of the betrayal would never be known, but the network's destruction prevented future damage. The ongoing flow of intelligence to Tehran was severed. FBI operations could proceed without Iranian insight into their planning. The investigation exposed systemic vulnerabilities in FBI security. How had 5 employees been recruited without detection? How had their activities continued for years? How had the pattern of failures not triggered earlier investigation? The answers prompted significant reforms. Continuous evaluation programs were enhanced. Financial monitoring was strengthened. Behavioral analysis was integrated into security protocols. The assumption that FBI employees were inherently trustworthy was replaced by verification systems. The counterintelligence culture shifted. The possibility of internal compromise, once considered almost unthinkable, became a permanent assumption. Trust was no longer given automatically. It had to be continuously earned and verified. The FBI personnel who worked mirror hunt and looking glass faced their own challenges. They had investigated colleagues, arrested people they had worked alongside, exposed betrayal within an institution built on trust and shared mission. The psychological toll was significant. Some agents requested transfers, unable to continue working in counterintelligence after the experience. Others recommitted with new determination, resolved to prevent future penetration. The bureau they protected had been violated from within. Rebuilding trust with each other, with allied services, with the public, would take years. The Iranian intelligence officers who run the network faced limited consequences. 3 operated under diplomatic cover and were expelled from the United States. They returned to Tehran as heroes, celebrated for their successful penetration of American counterintelligence. Others were identified but couldn't be arrested, protected by diplomatic status or operating from overseas locations beyond American reach. Indictments were issued. International arrest warrants were filed. But the handlers who had recruited American traitors remained free. The asymmetry was frustrating but unavoidable. American legal principles prevented the extrajudicial actions that authoritarian regimes used against their enemies. Justice for the handlers would have to wait. For Cardinal, extraction meant the end of a 12-year mission. The intelligence relationship that had begun with a risky approach and developed into one of America's most important sources was over. Cardinal could never return to Iran. The access that had provided invaluable intelligence was severed, but Cardinal was alive. That mattered more than any intelligence. The FBI had failed to prevent the penetration. They had failed to protect their sources for years. But when the ultimate test came, when Cardinal's life depended on detection and action, they had succeeded. Cardinal now lives under a new identity in a location that will never be disclosed, protected by a nation that failed to protect them initially, but ultimately kept its most important promise: survival. The threat of internal penetration never disappears. Foreign intelligence services continue to target FBI personnel. They identify vulnerabilities. They make approaches. They seek to repeat the success of networks that came before. The next recruitment operation is already underway. Somewhere, an FBI employee is being assessed. Their finances are being studied. Their vulnerabilities are being mapped. The approach is being planned. And somewhere, counterintelligence investigators are watching, looking for the patterns, monitoring the anomalies, preparing to detect the next betrayal before it causes catastrophic damage. That's where the next mirror hunt begins. That's how the FBI protects itself from the enemy within. This is what the FBI does every day. Whether you know it or not,